Good evening. We are in Genesis chapter 42, verse 29. When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had befallen them, saying, "The man, the Lord of the land, spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men. We are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan.' Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, 'By this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men. And I will deliver to you your brother, and you shall trade in the land.' As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were dismayed. And Jacob their father said to them, 'You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin? All this has come upon me.'" Now, the brothers come back to Jacob in the land of Canaan, and they tell him the story of what had happened. They had gone before this foreign official. They don't recognize that it's Joseph. So many years have passed, and he looks like an Egyptian. He speaks the Egyptian language. But they come before Joseph, and he accuses them of being spies. And they say, "No, we're not spies." And he said, "The only way I'll believe you is if you go back to your homeland and bring this youngest brother that you talk about, bring him back so that I can see him, and then I will take you to be honest men. And in the meantime, I am going to keep one of the brothers." He chose Simeon. He threw him in prison, and Simeon was going to serve as kind of as collateral until they returned back with their youngest brother, Benjamin. He sent them with the grain that they needed because of the famine, and he had his servants return all of their money and put them in the sacks of grain. And so when they opened up their grain and found their money was still there, they became frightened, not because of the good fortune. They became frightened because they thought, not only will we be accused of being spies, but we will also be accused of stealing the money back. And so they're telling all of this to their father Jacob. Jacob says, "No, we're not going to do it. Simeon is no more." He thought that since Simeon had been thrown into prison, probably Simeon had been killed or was dead in prison by that point. And he said, "Joseph is no more." Remember, he was told by his sons that after being shown the special coat he had given to his favorite son Joseph, it had goat's blood on it, and they led him to believe that wild animals had killed Joseph. And so he's not willing to risk his new favorite son, Benjamin. Then Reuben said to his father, "Slay my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he only is left. If harm should befall him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." So here, Reuben is willing to sacrifice his 2 sons. He's putting their lives on the line, but Jacob will not risk his youngest son, Benjamin. Remember, first Joseph and then at this point Benjamin were his favorite sons because they were the 2 sons of his favorite wife, Rachel, and he is not going to risk the life of Benjamin. Continuing on to Genesis chapter 43, verse 1. Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain which they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again, buy us a little food." But Judah said to him, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' Israel said, 'Why did you treat me so ill as to tell the man that you had another brother?' They replied, 'The man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, "Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?" What we told him was an answer to these questions. Could we in any way know that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Now, sadly, Jacob is ridiculing his sons for mentioning that they had a younger brother. He's ridiculing them when they were the ones who risked their lives to be in front of this foreign official that was threatening to them and accused them of being spies. They were the ones who made the trek to get the grain, to save their family, came all the way back. They had encountered all these problems, but Jacob is just upset that they happened to mention he had a younger son. And Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice." Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry down to the man a present, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds." Jacob was sending them the money, but also trying to sweeten the deal to kind of get on the good side of this foreign official, and hopefully it would save his sons' lives. "Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother and arise. Go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, that he may send back your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." So the men took the present, and they took double the money with them and Benjamin. And they arose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph bade him, and brought the men to Joseph's house. And the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us to make slaves of us and seize our asses." So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, my lord, we came down the first time to buy food, and when we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and there was every man's money in the mouth of his sack. Our money was in full weight, so we have brought it again with us, and we have brought other money down in our hand to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." He replied, "Rest assured, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father must have put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. So now the 11 brothers are brought together. They were in Joseph's house awaiting for him to arrive, and they must have been very frightened as to what was going to happen at this point. They didn't know the end of the story. They didn't know that this was a grace moment when their family would be restored. Continuing on in Genesis chapter 43, verse 24. And when the man had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, and they washed their feet, and when he had given their asses provender, and they made ready the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present which they had with them, and bowed down to him to the ground. So now Joseph came back, and the 12 brothers are back together for the first time in probably 15 years. None of them recognized Joseph. First of all, because of the amount of years that have passed since they'd seen him, but more importantly, because he had adopted the Egyptian look. He was clean shaven when all Hebrews wore beards, but he also dressed like an Egyptian. He wore linen clothes in contrast to the woolen clothing of shepherds, and he spoke Egyptian, and so they did not recognize him. And he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph made haste, for his heart yearned for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Let food be served." They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now the Egyptians didn't want to eat with the Hebrews because they were shepherds and considered unclean, and probably were unclean compared to the standards of the Egyptians. Now it's unclear as to why Joseph continued to play these mind games with his brothers, but probably, most likely, is that he wanted to see what kind of men that they had become. Did they regret what they had done to Joseph? Did they show any kind of remorse? Would they recognize him? And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. Jacob had favorite sons, first Joseph and then Benjamin, and Joseph had a favorite brother. Did you grow up with favorites in your family? Did your parents favor one sibling over the others? Whether you were the favorite or another sibling, you know how painful that kind of distinction is. It's important that we love one another, especially those in our family, for who they are, not for who we want them to be. Continuing on to Genesis chapter 44, Verse 1. Then he commanded the steward of his house, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain." And he did as Joseph told him. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their asses. When they had gone but a short distance from the city, Joseph said to his steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you returned evil for good? And why have you stolen my silver cup? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he divines? You have done wrong in so doing.' When he overtook them, he spoke to them these words. They said to him, 'Why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants that they should do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then should we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it be found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves.' He said, 'Let it be as you say. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and the rest of you shall be blameless.'" So Joseph continues these mind games. Again, he's trying to ascertain what kind of men they had become. Specifically, he wanted to see how they would treat the youngest brother, Benjamin. Remember that Benjamin was a son of Rachel, just like Joseph was. Rachel only had the two boys, Joseph and Benjamin. And Joseph wanted to see what these brothers of his thought of Benjamin, because that would reflect on how they might feel toward him. Then every man quickly lowered his sack to the ground, and every man opened his sack, and he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, and every man loaded his ass, and they returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell before him to the ground. Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that such a man as I can indeed divine?" And Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's slaves, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found." But he said, "Far be it from me that I shall do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." Then Judah went up to him and said, "O my Lord, let your servant, I pray you, speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself." Imagine the terrible fear that they had, not just because they were in trouble with a foreign official, because the very thing that their father had feared, losing Benjamin, seemed to be coming to pass. Continuing on with Genesis chapter 44, verse 19. Judah would explain to Joseph why Benjamin was special. "My Lord asked his servants, saying, 'Have you a father or a brother?' And we said to my Lord, 'We have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him.' Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes upon him.' We said to my Lord, 'The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father, his father would die. Then you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And when our father said, go again, buy us a little food, we said, we cannot go down. If our youngest brother goes with us, then we will go down, for we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother goes with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since. In that last verse, Judah told Joseph, though he didn't realize he was speaking to Joseph, Judah explained how much their father grieved the loss of his son, Joseph. Now, Joseph had never heard what story had been told to his father, Jacob. He didn't know if his father, Jacob, knew that he had been sold into slavery, if he had just disappeared, and now he finds out for the first time that Jacob had thought he was dead and grieved his loss. If you only take this one also for me, and harm befalls him, you will bring down my gray hairs in sorrow to Sheol. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the lad's life, when he sees that the lad is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame in the sight of my father all my life. Now therefore, let your servant, I pray you, remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the lad is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would come upon my father. So Judah offered his life in exchange for Benjamin. Judah was willing to give up his life, no matter what that meant, in order that Benjamin would live and return to their father. It's interesting to remember that Jesus was part of the tribe of Judah, and Jesus would offer his life for all of humanity as a sign of the Father's love for all of his children. Continuing to Genesis chapter 45, verse 1. Now we get to the pinnacle of the story of Joseph. Then Joseph could not control himself before all of those who stood by him, and he cried, make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Joseph cried when he revealed himself to his brothers. He felt joy, he felt forgiveness for them, he felt grace. But the brothers, when they recognized finally their brother, they were silent because they were afraid that this brother that they had wronged would seek out revenge against them. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. So it was still early in the famine in Egypt, but Canaan had obviously been struck hard enough that in just those 2 years, these brothers had visited Egypt twice to buy grain for their family. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Make haste and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. And there I will provide for you. For there are yet 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So Joseph tells his brothers that despite the evil and the troubles that he had endured, God had been with him all along. And in the midst of all the struggles, God had guided Joseph and established him in a place of influence. Continuing on in Genesis chapter 45, verse 13, Joseph revealed himself and God's plans to his brothers. You must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt and of all that you have seen. Make haste and bring my father down here. Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all of his brothers and wept upon him. And after that his brothers talked with him. When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Joseph had been such a loyal asset to Pharaoh that Pharaoh was pleased to give Joseph's family the best that he had to offer. Now I imagine that played into the feeling of the Egyptians 400 years later, when the Hebrew people had been so successful in Egypt that the Egyptians grew very jealous of them and turned them into slaves for the Egyptians. Command them also, do this. Take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Give no thought to your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. The sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each and all of them he gave festal garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 festal garments. To his father he sent as follows: 10 asses loaded with good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses loaded with grain, bread, and provision for his father on the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, do not quarrel on the way. Now, I love that as they were headed home, Joseph told them, don't fight on the way back. So they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart fainted, for he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Jacob received the good news that not only were Simeon and Benjamin out of harm's way, but his long-lost son Joseph was still alive. And not only that, ruler over all of Egypt. Now, here, the biblical text, instead of referring to Jacob as Jacob, they use his other name, Israel. And that's because the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel, are all alive. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care.